Hello, we're looking at how to web scrape a site called food.com. Okay, I've just noticed I left in parse, which is not needed. And let's, we can leave that there. We're not worried about next page code yet. We'll do that last for the very reason that once we activate that, we are going to be in for a very long test. So we want to drop down from parse down to parse details next. So outside of the for loop, we will need something to take us to parse details. So I've just added from Scrapy, or I haven't just added, but I have added from Scrapy import request. What we need to do here is do I can set request equal to request URL I need to indent that. So whilst we're in each one of those 8 recipes, we need to go and visit it. So URL equals link. Headers will just equal as ever. Headers equals self.headers, which is that. And callback equals self. Remember to put self in front because we're inside a class. Self dot nearly typed object there. Self dot parse underscore details. Good. Okay. Next, let's go here. We actually need to know if this request is actually working. So just as a demo, I'm just going to get it to print OK. So we should end up with it going through each of the 8 links. Let me, I can comment at that now as well. We don't want to really see that in our output each test. Right, let's test this. And see what happened. We appear to have... I know, I left out the yield request. So I've made, I've created a variable, but I haven't used it. So yield request. Now try. I think I just saw some OKs flash up there. It's looking better. Yeah. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Perfect. Do you notice how the OKs aren't in sequence with the URLs? Scrapy is asynchronous, which is good because it means it runs faster, because it tries to sort of do 2 things at once effectively, but it's not always good if you're trying to run things in a specific order. So bear that in mind. For now though, this is exactly what we want. we are now dropping down to our parse details, and we're doing that for each link in our main page. So next we need to look at get recipe and get ingredients. How are we going to do that? Well, if you remember, we've already identified some JSON which contains those. So let's just go back and refresh ourselves about that. So here we are back on the recipe page, and effectively what we've done is we've identified 8 of these, and now we've clicked on one and we've dropped down a level. So we are, if this will load, yeah. So parse details is working on this page, and we want, if you remember, we want to extract, I believe it was recipe instructions. Let's expand that. From my notes earlier, I remember it was called recipe instructions with a capital I. And the text we want is in there somewhere. Good, okay. Well, I'm just going to call up my notes that I made when I ran Scrapy on the direction, on the recipe and the ingredients. So let's do that. So for testing, we want a local details URL, and we want to fetch $200, good. And I just want to check my code from my notes that I made earlier. In fact, it was actually the very same syntax that we just used on the top level page. So I'm just going to paste that in. That's exactly what you saw just now. Let's do preprint res. So that was really good. Effectively, we used identical code there to what we just used in the for loop to get the 8 links. Here, we're using the same XPath selector to extract the recipe and recipe instructions. So if you understand what we did to get the 8 links, we've effectively done the same thing here. We've loaded a JSON object from the JavaScript into a variable called res, and we just did a pprint on res. If I do, I've already imported JSON, so let's do, what should we call it? Call it recipe equals JSON dot loads res, and then we want to print recipe. So we're actually going to pick out recipe instructions And from earlier we identified that we want the index to be 5, so here we go. I think that was just one of the steps, so if we change it to 4, yeah, we're just getting the steps, so we are going to need to put in a bit of logic to iterate through all of these. Okay, let's go back to our code and under get recipe we can actually use the reason why this works is because inside parse details we're actually working with a different response. Why are we working with a different response? We're working with a different response because we've requested a different URL. So the response here contained the 8 thumbnails. The response here, because when the method finishes everything gets cleared, here the response takes on a life of its own, and it's now become the JSON object which contains the recipes and ingredients. So how are we going to handle this? We might need to use a while loop actually. Because there's no fixed number of steps, is there? Let's just print recipe equals JSON dot, as we did before, loads res print recipe. So recipe is the name of our dictionary, and we're using recipe instructions as our first key, and then let's just use 0 to start with. We'll be putting an index, an iterable in here next, but let's just run that and see what happens. Okay, let's look at it in big. Good, okay. So for each of the recipes, we've gone off and got the first line of the recipe instructions. So what was the first recipe? Award-winning chili and heat, olive oil, ground meat and cook. Okay. The second one was gingerbread, which the first line of the recipe is baking powder, ginger, cinnamon. So ginger, that's looking good. We'll just check the third line. No way of tying that up, but I think we can be fairly confident that that's extracted the first line per recipe. So now we need to handle how to get all of the lines per recipe. Okay, so I've refined it down to recipe using the recipe instructions key, and with pprint we get this. The problem I've got is I don't know how many steps there will be, and I would imagine that would, see, we've got note 4, 3, 2, 1, and I'm expecting that this could change based on each recipe. So we've got 4 here. If we go to this one and C4 recipe, I don't think that's even going to be 1, so let's try it. Let's try and do fetch on that instead. So fetch, paste that, 200 response, and again we can just do the same. No, we can't. We need to load the response again. Let's so we've got a new response, so we need to load the response into a new variable. Need to do that again to get the res, and then recipe equals json loads.res, and now if we do, here we go. We were still getting the crock pot recipe, whereas we need the crepe. So that note syntax that we saw earlier, note 2, note 3, that's just what the poster or the person who left the recipe used. So what we're interested in is text. So we need to get all of the text. I think what we'll do is we'll extract the text and then put a new line after each chunk of text that we extract. Let's do this, and yeah, so we need to specify that we want to extract the text. I think I'm going to get a slice error here. Yeah. Okay, so I think we're going to need to iterate through, because this is a selection of dictionaries inside a list. So let's have a look at that. Okay, so I just went and grabbed a cup of coffee and had a little think about things, and really what we're dealing with is a list. So I needed to establish the length of the list, and the list is its recipe instructions. So print, don't even need to do pre-print there, print the length of the recipe instructions within recipe, which gives me 10, which is good. Now we know that I can iterate through it. So let's copy that. And we can use a while loop, and we can say, I'm going to turn this into a variable, so rcpl equals recipe length. So while I is less than rcpl, print recipe instructions I, and then we need to do I equals I plus 1, otherwise we'll get an infinite loop. Let's do a bit of tidying up here as well. That's a lot of tests we've been looking at. So if you're ready to see this test, let's go for it. And finished in 3.79 seconds. Let's see what we've got. I briefly saw it flash up and it looked pretty good. So from line 40, if you can see the line numbers just here, slice one onion and place in the crock pot. I know from memory that that's, yeah, it's still mentioning crock pot down here. So all of this, and if you remember, we had the notes in the crock pot recipe. So from 40 down to there, that looks to me like that is all the, what was it? I forget the name of the recipe, but it's all there for that one. The next recipe was salsa, and that looks pretty good. That looks to me like it's a salsa recipe. It mentions it there. Yeah, we're actually extracting that type how to step and text here, so we need to just slightly refine our selector. I'm just going to drag the mini map down a bit. It looks like we're in business. As I say, Scrapy is asynchronous, so you can often see jumbled up output. I think what I'm going to do is try and just pick out the text, and then we'll yield it from parse details. We'll yield it and we'll see what we get in our results.csv file. So let's go back to our code, and I'm going to test this in Scrapy shell. Does this work? No. What if we just put in number 2, 3? Then we need to do text after. Text. Do you see what's happening? Before I put this here, we were getting the key and the value. Now we're just getting, take out the P again, I think I've just because I've cursed it. There we go. So let's try and add text, copy that onto the end of here and run it again. Just going to get rid of that. And this time I'm hoping it's just like it's just picked out the text and not the the start of the dictionary. Yeah, perfect. That is fantastic. So we are now ready to assign that to our recipe variable. How are we going to do that? We probably should do that as a list and then append to the list, I think. So ls equals empty square brackets. And instead of print, we will just call it rcptx, and we just want to do ls.append rcptx, and if we clear that, we know that works. Let's test this. And although we'll see the output on the screen, it will be much shorter this time because it's just done the OK. It's not printed, and that should be empty. Yeah. So now what we need to do is put in our yield, and we need to do that here. We don't need it indented. And look at items to find, just to refresh what the name of yeah, it was recipe. So here we need to say yield, open curly braces, and then recipe colon ls. Let's test that. Looks okay. Not good. Okay, what's gone wrong? So a bit of a look here. Stored in food results. It must be something quite simple here, that not a typo. No. Okay, so I actually have got all of the recipes in the CSV now. As you can see, 2 down to 9. So obviously 1 is the key. We don't have it split or separated, so it does just look like one big recipe, but it's all there. So how did I do that? We know that the length was length of recipe. We used the length of the recipe to iterate through a while loop, and we appended each recipe instruction to the list, and then we yielded the list. So we've got the ingredients, and we've got 8 so far. Now The next page code we'll leave to the end because that could potentially make our output file very big and our test very long. So if you're ready, let's begin with get ingredients.